originally from Indian Lake, so Hamilton County is familiar to me. Moved here in 1973 when I got married, and we've been here ever since. I haven't moved anywhere else. Grass always appeared greener, but I knew it wasn't. So we stayed here. I became the Hamilton County historian almost 5 years ago now. And after teaching history for 36 years, and then I went into administration, it was like a kid in a candy store. I walked in and started looking at photographs. I have my own personal collection, and some of that I will show you a little later on. But through the years, people knew I was interested, and they gave me certain things. It's interesting, different things came up, and you're going to see a lot of the same pictures because I'm focused in on an area that very compact, but a lot of things went on there. And especially since that was determined was going to be the county seat. In 1817, that wasn't the case. A man by the name of Philip Rhinelander lived on the end of Elm Lake Road on the lake, had built a huge mansion with the help of slaves and indentured service, brought animals with him, planted all sorts of fruit trees, and started to live here. He decided that the new county, Hamilton County, that the county seat should be in Speculator at the outlet of Lake Pleasant. There's only one problem with that. The road didn't go there. If you wanted to get from Wells to Lake Pleasant, and if you're familiar with it, fine. If you're not familiar with it, I'll try and give you enough of a location so you can orient yourself, because then we can go into talking about the hotels. If you leave Wells, there's a road called Gilmantown Road. Goes right into the woods. You don't make the sharp turn to the right on 30, you keep going straight. And you go past Charlie Lake, and then you go past Gilman Lake. Also, you passed Elbow Creek, that was first. And then you ended up on what we call South Shore Road. At South Shore Road, you made a sharp left. You came out to where the present courthouse is. Rhinelander made that proposition, even sold the property at the outlet of Lake Pleasant to the county supervisors for $10 and said, here, build your buildings here. Because we knew we were going to have a jail and a courthouse and a treasurer's office and something, so on and so forth. So, bottom line is this. That's in 1817. How do we know this? Well, Aaron and the town clerk were looking through some documents. They happened to find a deed. And it's thrilling to hold a paper that's 200 years old in your hand. And I told him, take care of this. And started to suggest different areas where he could send it to be preserved. Because something like that is very hard to find. That never transpired, though. Didn't happen. In, I believe it was 1838, Andrew Morehouse, that's Andrew K. Morehouse, and I say that because there were a couple of Andrew Morehouses, the founder of the town of Morehouse. He said, look, we don't want that there. We want to have the county seat in Paseco. He knew that he wasn't going to get Morehouse, but he would shoot for Paseco. They couldn't make a decision. So, like all other good state projects, they identified 3 people that didn't live here and said, you guys make a decision, which they did. And they decided on the hill where the current county court complex is. It was decided that that was a better location because there was access from Wells along the southern shore of Lake Pleasant. Also connected with Route 8, which connected with Piseco and Morehouse, and Route 8 came down to Route 30, which went to Indian Lake. That road was a dirt road. It wasn't very good, but they did find it possible to make that trip down. So, all of these people are coming from wherever they lived in the county, and if you're aware, we're the third largest county in the state of New York. Every trip from every town in Hamilton County is a long ride. It's a long ride in a car. But imagine with a horse. Interesting, my father used to say, well, we can't come to visit you in Lake Pleasant. He lived in Indian Lake. He said it's too far to drive. But I told him, stay at Louis Lake for the night and then come the rest of the way. That's what people used to do. The only road was from Wells through Gilmantown. Road still exists, but of course you all know that Route 30 is the main access. So, once they decided that the hill, where the county complex is right now, was going to be where the county was going to be, they needed a place for people to stay. Because number one, if the supervisors came to meet, they needed a place to stay and spend the night because they weren't going home. In most cases, they traveled at least 2 days, especially if you think about it. If you traveled from Long Lake, it was probably a 2-day trip. It wasn't a quick trip. It was very, very slow. So, I didn't bring my mouse, so I'm doing this a little bit differently, but we'll get there. A lot of people came here by stage. Now, the stage worked up until 1915, and that came from Northville to Lake Pleasant. And you might say, well, why did they do that? Well, let's look at it. The Northville and Lake Pleasant stage route, our Willard proprietor, for those in the back, I'll read it through. The new summer agreement to enter through the southern gates of the Adirondacks is now complete. Stages will run during the months of June, July, August, and September, leaving Northville for Wells, Lake Pleasant, and Sageville, Lake Piseco, and etc. On Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, on arrival of the AM train at 10:30 a.m. Well, from that point, returning on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays to connect with a 1 o'clock p.m. train. That train went back to New York City. All right. One word of comment may not be inappropriate to the traveler wishing to enjoy the luxury of a cool summer resort for a few days. None can excel and few equal the scenery and healthful localities of Lake Pleasant, Round and Piseco Lake, Round being Sacandaga Lake, besides the best hunting and fishing grounds in the Adirondacks. Okay, up until 1915, what did that look like? Well, in some cases it was standing room only. This is the stage that would come from Northville. When they arrived in Lake Pleasant, this is what they would have seen. All right, now this is after the 1900s because you notice there's a car there. But it's an old car, a very old car. Why was this important? Well, let's look at it. This is the courthouse corner between 1917 and 1928. How do I know that it's not 1930? Because the courthouse was rebuilt in 1928 and rebuilt by 1929 to the point where they could hold court because a man by the name of Ernest D had killed another man in Whitaker Lake, and they were going to have the trial. Yulee Davis was dead. Ernest D killed him. The knife is on display at the Adirondack Museum. excuse me, panoramic experience, I guess they call it now. If you look at this picture carefully, courthouse is the big white in front, treasurer's office to the right. The big building in the back is the first Morley Inn. We're not even there yet. And the building over to the right is the Lake Pleasant House. All right? Both of these will come into play in just a minute. Now let's talk about the Lake Pleasant House for a minute. Lake Pleasant Inn was built by Hezekiah Sage in 1840. If you want to see where it was, go up to the Episcopal Church in Lake Pleasant. That's about the place where it was. A portion of the church was still there when my wife and I moved into town. It isn't there anymore. But the parsonage still sits there. And it still lives there. Okay. That was built in 1840. It was the only hotel when they originally started the county. So that's where they would have stayed. In most cases, they didn't like the courthouse all that much, so they had their meetings in the Lake Pleasant House. It's called Lake Pleasant Inn, Lake Pleasant House. You're going to find a lot of these hotels have several different names. Reason being that, they got sick of one name and went for another. When Sage built it, right, that's what he called it. The town was called Sageville. Why? Because Hezekiah Sage owned most of the property. So it was appropriate to call it Sageville. Now we call it Lake Pleasant. But that's how it got the name Sageville. Let's see. Here's another view. They're going for a hayride. Now here it's called the Morley's Inn. Here again, it's because in the latter days of this hotel, J.D. Morley owned it, as well as the one on the hill. It's just, I like the photograph. I think it's indicative of what people would do. Everybody pile in. What do you do when you go away? You get into a bus and you ride around and see what the sights are. Okay. Stephen D. Andrews ran the hotel from 1871 to 1889. That's when the telegraph came to the area. Telegraph was from Wells to Sageville. It was the only means of communication at that particular point. And you can see that telephone pole there is not for telephone yet. That's for telegraph. You had to do that first. Telephone came later. And of course the telephones were few and far between. So, the first hotel on the top of the hill was Call's Hotel, built in 1880. A man by the name of Silas Call. Here again. Initially it was called the Conjumuck Inn. And then it became the Sacandaga Lake Hotel. It was built by Silas Call. And was run under that name. But finally it was changed to Call's Hotel. It just sounded, who owns it? Mr. Call does. We'll call it Call's Hotel. And finally, a guy by the name of J. Thomas Stearns called it Sacandaga Lake Hotel, which adds to the confusion, because you're going to hear that again. In 1904, the hotel burned to the ground. All right? One down. You're going to find that that's a common theme. Notable things we need to remember. 1901, first telephone line was run to the nearby hotels by J.D. Morley. J.D. Morley was here for quite a while. And he seemed to be the mover and shaker. In 1903, the state constructs a road from the county seat to Speculator. Road would extend from the hotel of J.D. Morley, known as Lake Pleasant Inn, to the store Lee Fountain. Lee Fountain. If you happen to have an old piece of furniture that has yellow birch along the edge of it and birch legs, it very well could have been built by Lee Fountain. Lee Fountain was quite a furniture maker. You go into some of the older homes in town, you're going to find Lee Fountain furniture. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. It took hours and hours and hours to build it. But it's still standing. It doesn't rot. It's not gone. It's still there. He also, at this time, J.D. Morley was inventive. He sought a patent for a dishwasher. He found a machine. Good idea, right?
Yeah.
It was 2 buckets that went up and down and up and down, washed the dishes. He put that in the Lake Pleasant house. All right? Whether he ever got the patent or not, I have no idea. Haven't been able to find that out. So, let's go to the next one. In 1907, since Hall's Hotel had burned down, J.D. Morley rebuilt the inn on the site of the Sacandaga Lake Hotel. It was able to hold 40 people when it first opened. Now, I'm going to give you one disclaimer, all right? In my research for this, Aaron asked me to do this a year ago, and I avoided it like the plague. Only because my research is so vast. I get a lot of requests for information. But I found a lot of discrepancies in dates. They're not massive, but they're there. And anybody who does any historical research in any way, manner, shape, or form are going to find that one person's idea of what happened is totally different from this person's. And quite often, if you're taking word of mouth, it's going to be different. So if you see a date that you say, well, that's not the date I know, maybe it's not. To the best of my knowledge, these are the dates. All right? So, 40 guests when it first opened. Think about that. He had no idea. He didn't know whether it was going to be popular or not. Well, that changed. Now, I want to point out a couple things. Here again, this is Sacandaga Lake Hotel, which it didn't become Morley's, well, here again, they call it Morley's too. So you got a couple different names. All right? He was the owner and proprietor. Now, I'm going to go to the next photo because it's far clearer. And if you look at the house over on the far right, that house still exists. It's owned by Tim and Stephanie Smith. All right? And that house is still there. Hotel, however, is not. The only thing that even is close is a set of concrete sidewalk going up the hill, which is sidewalk that leads to nowhere. But it used to go to the hotel. Right? So as far as finding things, now behind Tim and Stephanie's house, up on the hill, there's a small building that was a cottage that was built by them at the same time. And that is still standing. There used to be a barn there. I worked for Robert Osborne and William Osborne at the golf course when I first moved here. I taught school all year and I worked on the golf course in the summer. And just a wonderful experience in my life because Robert Osborne always took me aside and told me what happened and when. And he knew. He knew he was a gift. And his grandson lives down across from the public beach. And he has a lot of this knowledge, which is great, because you've got a source, a resource. All right? But Robert told me all sorts of stories. So it was fun, because he was a direct descendant of the people who owned the Osborne Inn. So, let's keep going.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So was the golf course there when this hotel?
The golf course is not there yet. I'll get to that.
Okay.
I promise. But not yet. Don't think golf course yet.
But is the front door, is that facing towards the golf course?
Yes, sir. Right towards the golf course. If you were sitting on the porch, and I'll show you a picture of that in a few minutes, you look across the road, just field. All right? Now, since they could only house 40 guests, all of a sudden they realized, we've got a lot more people that want to come. So, a few things they did. First of all, they built cottages. These cottages are houses that still exist. And there's at least 3 of them that are built in the same way. So you can tell that they were all built by the same. They had a set of plans and they said, okay, build the next one. Not one of them is insulated unless they've done it since the 1950s. Yes?
Where are the cottages? Are those 3 next to?
Just beyond Tim and Stephanie's house.
Okay.
So if you go across the road from the golf course, Tim and Stephanie are first, and then there's 1, 2, 3 houses down. Those are the cottages. All right? And if you look at that picture carefully, when you drive by it, I guarantee you're going to say, oh, I saw that house. All right? Well, what do? First of all, I'll draw attention to a couple things I thought were really, really pushing it. During the season, we're entirely free from black flies and mosquitoes. What a lie. And that's because they're 100 feet above the lake and 2,000 feet above sea level. The highest occupied land in the Adirondacks. Hay fever and malaria are entirely unknown in this section. We don't cater to pulmonary invalids, and we ask all those suffering from this complaint not to apply for accommodations, as in justice to our patrons, it will be impossible for us to take them. Nice people. But they needed more space. All right, you've all heard about glamping, right? You know what glamping is? They had nothing. Remember, this is before 1910, glamping was at the Moorlet. They built tents out back. They built platforms, put the tents on platforms, screen door in the front, screen window in the back. They put in 2 beautiful beds. They put in a wash basin, a set of drawers, dresser, and you ate all your meals in the main building. And according to this pamphlet, which I'll let people look at later, which, believe it or not, strange things happen. I've been working on this for a long time. And the other day, one of the ladies who cleans at the courthouse came in my office. She said, a lady dropped this off. I said, who was it? I said, I don't know. She just said, give it to you. Well, I've asked 3 different people that I thought it might be. Still have no idea. So if it's any one of you, please let me know. But this was printed, I believe, in 1909. And it's tells you all about the Morley House. And it is a treasure. And I just got that. So I got a lot, and that's where I got this picture of the tent. Amazing. And they went from 40 to 250. Think about that for a minute. So, glamping at its beginning. All right? I'll move on. I haven't wasted a lot of time. Let's see. You just asked about the golf course. I know this is supposed to work. There we go. All right. This is the view from the new Hotel Morley, looking across the road. There's the concrete going to the street, Route 8. There's the golf course, but there's no golf course there. All right. 17. You see where I am? All right. Morley Inn was set to open on Memorial Day in 1916. But a fire was built in the kitchen stove to heat water. Most of you probably either remember or have heard stories of stoves that were heated with wood. And they had an cast iron box on the side. where the fire was, heated the water. And the water would come out and you could draw any hot water that you needed for any purpose you had. All right? They started the fire in the wood stove to heat the water. They had to clean because people were coming. Fire broke out in the kitchen, began to spread. The rest of the building became involved to the point where they stopped fighting the fire. There's a couple of us in here that belong to the Lake Pleasant Fire Department. We don't stop, but we have water available. Unfortunately, only a small portion of the contents was able to be saved. A hotel was booked for the season, and 250 people were expected for Memorial Day. Loss was estimated at $30,000. In today's value, that would be almost $900,000 for one weekend. Construction was started in the fall of 1916. Large, comfortable hotel was ready for occupancy by the summer of 1917, 1 year. Cost of construction, $65,000. Okay. So how much did it cost to build in today's money? About $1.8 million. Only it was $65,000 then. Asa Aird's lumber mill was where they cut the logs. That's out on Route 8. And I won't try to tell you where that is, but just trust me, it's almost before Airdville Cemetery on the other side of the road. Asa didn't know what he was in for, but he started cutting lumber. All right? They built it. They got it up. 1917. Here's the new Morley Inn in 1917, and there's the concrete steps. Obviously, not all that were there at that particular time. First tennis courts at the Morleys. All right, and this is the new building. It's not the first one; it's the second one. They were croquet courts. Croquet, I guess, wasn't all that popular. It's a little bit like tennis and pickleball. So they turned them into tennis courts. Tennis courts were down to the right of the hotel, would be behind where the parking lot is, behind the courthouse. The house on the far right, I believe, is the one that still stands. And they built tennis courts there. And now where the tennis courts currently exist. This is a different location. This is Morley's Bar. Pre-1932. So it was not Prohibition yet. Now here's the tennis courts. Took over for the croquet area after they had been improved. Obviously, you see the houses across the street. They still exist. The one in the middle, it still exists. You can see the chimney on it. And this was called the Lawn Cottage. Currently, it's the site of the clubhouse. You play golf? The Lawn Cottage. Trust me, the building that's sitting there is the Lawn Cottage. It's just had a lot of updates, new siding, new roof, whatever. But that's there. As you can see, there's no golf course yet. All right. So we'll take another step forward. Okay, there's the view, no golf course. Soon after it was built, Morley's was sold to the Adirondack Club, renamed the Hamilton Inn. All right, and the Hamilton Inn existed until 1949. The Adirondack Club and Golf Course, soon to be the Hamilton Inn. Photo prior to 1928. How do I know that? That white building in the distance, that's the courthouse. Remember, it was torn down in 1928 because it wasn't meeting the needs, had to be rebuilt by 1929. So this is pre-1928. A little bit better picture of the golf course. Some ladies going down to watch someone come up the hill to the ninth green. Obviously, at that particular time, you could see way off in the distance. Robert Osborne sat on the porch one day, and he said, "Ernie, come here, I want to tell you a story." And Robert always had a cigar on the corner of his mouth. And I said, "What are you going to tell me about, Robert?" Never knowing what I was going to get. He said, "Down that first fairway, all the way down the second fairway." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know Gimbel's in New York City?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Across the street from Macy's, right?" "Yeah." He said, "Gimbel came in here with a lieutenant governor in an airplane, landed on the golf course, taxied up to the clubhouse, turned the plane around and parked. They had come to see Gene Tunney's spar. Got in the plane. They took off from the Lawn Cottage, started down the first fairway, down the second fairway. They started to climb and climb and climb. They didn't make it. They ended up in a pine tree." He said, "It was never so funny. I saw a Gimbel climbing down a pine tree." So, interesting stories. But you get an idea of what it was like. And I think that's the important part. All right, here's the golf shop, they called it at that point, the Hamilton Inn. Now, they had a deck on the front, but that disappeared at different times. When I worked there, there was no deck. All right? That was in 73 and 74 when we first got married. Here's the ninth green and first tee on the Hamilton Inn golf course. And a little bit better picture of, this is Tim and Stephanie's. That's the next one down. You can see the houses. Those are the cottages. And you could rent a cottage. A lot of people stayed in the cottages. And then the Hamilton Inn in 1949, you know, I think this is a picture of the Morley when it burned. Isn't it, Eric?
Yeah,
I think that's what it was identified
that
as.
was the second photo.
But I thought it was fitting. It was the end of an era when the Hamilton Inn burned. Our neighbor told me he wasn't very old at that point, and he said I went down and watched the Hamilton Inn burn. And that was in 1949.
So, Ernie, it was only open for like a year?
No. It was the Morley, okay, built in 1917, existed until 1949.
Name changes.
I'm sorry?
The names. So just one of the name changes?
No, the first one, the new Morley, was from 1907 to 1916. And then the new Morley was from, let's see, it started in 1917, but then it changed to Hamilton Inn when they sold out. You find out a lot of the old hotels. Think about it for a minute. People would travel. Let's see. Just bear with me for just a minute. Ted Avers, Stella King say, it was recommended, they found this, it says it was recommended for those coming from New York to leave the city on a Monday evening on the Hudson River night boat to Albany. You arrived in Albany on Tuesday morning. They would board the train for the west at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, reaching Amsterdam about 10 o'clock. That was 10 o'clock in the morning. A comber would be at the door for a 4 to 5 hour trip over the roughest of mountain roads. All right? Their first stop was at Patridge's, which is in Northville. Then the next day, they left first thing in the morning for a 5 hour trip to Lake Pleasant. It was not easy to get here. You really want to come, but when they came, they stayed not for a week, probably for 2 weeks in most cases, because it was the best way to do it. We had cottages next to our house in Indian Lake, and people came for 1, 2 weeks. They didn't come for a weekend, you know. We think nothing of going somewhere for the weekend and having a great time and coming home. You know, when they left, they stayed away for a long time. And I think one of the things, if I didn't say it before, they had a deal. You could ride the train to Albany and then to Amsterdam and then get on the stage and they would take you to the hotel and then take you back home, $11.25.